Hey guys, my name is Toby and welcome back to another exciting Photoshop tutorial where today we're going to be talking about using custom brush presets, and we're going to be using them on this image here. Now, this is something we did in the studio the other day, and I think it's really just missing one key thing. It doesn't look like there's much of an atmosphere to this shot. It is just very clean and very sterile, particularly considering the subject matter. You'd expect this to be a little bit more grimy, a little bit dirtier. You know, you want some dust kicking off the ground like he's just been dropped off by a helicopter or something like that, just to make it look a lot more interesting, a lot more dramatic, kind of a lot more blockbuster movie, if you like. And, you know, it does look like it was shot in a studio because it was shot in a studio. We did this on a green screen, so we've got all of our different elements kind of cut out and all the rest of it. And I think that if we add some dust to this shot, it's going to help tie all of the elements together as well, make this composite look a lot more believable. So we're going to do this using custom brush presets, and we're actually going to use some of Photoshop's existing brushes to help make our own brush for just this purpose. So what we're going to do is create a new document, and the best way to do that is by hitting Command or Control and N. And we're going to create a new document with a width of 500 and a height of 500 pixels. Resolution and all the rest of it doesn't really matter because we're not keeping this document, we're just using it to build our brush in. I will point out that you could, if you really wanted to, just use a layer inside of this document to make this, but I think just so we're very clear about what we're actually doing, we're going to just do it in this new document. So let's get started. First things first, we need to come over to our brush tool, which is keyboard shortcut B, and by default our brush kind of looks something a bit like that, which is not particularly appealing. Now what you've probably seen is if you click on this little dialog up here, or if you right click anywhere on the screen, you've actually got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of brush tips to choose from, and these all come default with Photoshop, so this is all stuff that you have already. And as well as that, even though this list is fairly big, if you click on this little settings wheel here, you can actually load up one of these different lists of brushes, and there are literally hundreds of these things packed within Photoshop that are all hidden away. And you know, this even goes off the bottom of our recording, there's so many of these on this list. So you've got loads of things to choose from. So let's just take a quick look at what a few of these do for you. So if we've got like something like this one, which just gives you a nice kind of natural looking brush. You've also got, let's have another play, something like this one, which is a bit of a weird special effect kind of grass brush. There's another similar one here, which does random leaves. What else have we got? Let's have a look. You've also got these sort of calligraphy brush tips, which work very well with a tablet if you're using one of them. And it gives you this little dialogue, and it shows you kind of what the brush is actually doing. And they're designed to kind of calculate your movements a little bit better. And if you've got like a really fancy stylus that has like tilt controls in it, you can actually tilt the brush and do all sorts of things. I don't, unfortunately, have a pretty standard stylus, but the option is there. There's an awful lot you can do with the presets that already exist within Photoshop, but we are going to make our own preset. And we're going to do that using this brush tip here. And I'll show you the reason why I've picked this one to do this with. If I just make this quite a lot bigger, and I just click a couple of times, there we go. You can kind of see that this brush tip has various different amounts of transparency in it. So there are certain areas that are darker than others, and that is because of this sort of distributed transparency. It's not consistent all the way across the brush. So a lot of brushes will just give you solid color. This one actually kind of fades in and out, which is going to be really good for giving us a natural looking texture to our smoke and dust. So I'm just going to clear that for now. I'm going to go back to our brush tool, keyboard shortcut B, and I'm going to make it smaller with the square bracket keys. So where the magic kind of happens with the brush tools is under this tab here, which is the brush tab, and this is where all of the settings for your brush will kind of live. And I'm just going to turn these off for now because we don't really want them on. This is what our brush looks like by default. Just that tip by itself gives you this kind of shape when you draw with it, which isn't great, and we're going to hopefully kind of spice this up a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is turn on some shape dynamics, and here we have something called size jitter, which is going to randomize the size of our brush. So the important thing to remember as well is that brushes it's not just like a streak. What it's actually doing is every like few milliseconds it's going to draw a single brush. If I turn the spacing up, it's going to kind of draw one every now and then, and like the smaller you have this, the kind of more frequently it will draw one, if that makes sense. So when you have it set to like 1%, it just comes up like a big streak because it's drawing them that quickly. So what shape dynamics is going to do is it's going to actually randomize the size of each of those little, drawings, I suppose, if that makes sense. That's probably not the right word for it. But if you click and drag, you're now going to see that now that I've turned on shape dynamics and put the size jitter up, it's just a little bit more random than that is, because it is randomizing the size. Now, if I kind of click, it's going to show you that that was that big, and then if you actually look at the little icon I've got, it's going to randomize in size every time I click. So that's kind of what's happening. The problem is that the really little ones are actually kind of being covered up by the big ones at the moment, but that's not hugely important. You can turn the minimum diameter up, which means that they can only go so small. And we're going to do that. I think we're going to put that something about 50-ish%. You can also turn the angle jitter up. So every instance of the brush is going to be at a slightly different angle. And then the roundness jitter is kind of just going to change the shape a little bit. But anything you can do to kind of make this more random is going to really help sell this effect, because we want this natural, random looking dust. We don't want it to look like a Photoshop brush. So next one we're going to do is scattering, and if you look at our little preview here, you're going to see that the scattering is just going to kind of spread out our brush tip, and now it's actually drawing quite a large brush. Probably don't want it to be quite that big for this particular instance. What you can do here is if you want to turn this up really high, you can do that, but then it's kind of quite spread out, and you can turn the count up so that it will fill in a bit more if that's what you want to do. But we want to keep this fairly small, I think. We just want something like that is probably pretty good. And then we also want to play with the transfer. So this is kind of all your opacity settings and that sort of thing. And we can randomize the opacity, and now it's going to really start to look a lot more like smoke. And we'll probably just leave the flow jitter alone. I think that's going to be fine. So now we have something that looks like this, and now we're really starting to get somewhere, I think. So what we can do is I'm just going to make the brush a little bit bigger, and now we're actually going to draw our new brush tip, which we're going to use for our smoke effect. And what we're trying to avoid doing is touching the edges of this window, because if you kind of hit an edge, you end up with this really hard edge for our new brush, which is not what we want. We want it to be nice and smooth all the way around so we don't get these edges that don't look natural. I'm just going to kind of click, and you might need to have a couple of goes at this just to kind of get it to look fairly right. Let's try something like that maybe. And you want to get like as much kind of variation in there as possible. So maybe we could turn on pressure sensitivity for opacity, so I can kind of just have a couple of goes at this. Maybe not that hard. Maybe something like that's probably not bad. And then I'm just going to make the brush a lot smaller, turn off my pressure sensitivity opacity, and just draw a couple of like little darker areas in this, just to kind of give it that slightly more natural, random looking shape. And you know, you can kind of play with this for as long as you like. I think that's probably going to be sufficient for what we're trying to do. So now that we have this, what we can do is go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and this is going to save this shape as our new brush tip. And we're going to call this Dust Brush. There we go. So now if I go to our brush tool, it should actually have automatically selected our new brush preset, which is now at the very bottom of our list. And what it's going to do, if I just clear this, oops, Control A, delete, enter, there we go, is now we have something that looks like that. And unfortunately, we now need to kind of do that all again. So we're going to go up to our brush preset, turn on shape dynamics, scattering and transfer, and we're going to turn up the size jitter. We're going to turn up the minimum diameter, turn up the angle jitter quite a lot more than we did before. Scattering, we want to turn the scattering up quite high and then maybe bring the count up. And then transfer, opacity jitter 100%. Well, let's see what flow jitter does. That's kind of all right. We'll do that, I think. We'll have a little bit of flow jitter in there. And now we're going to kind of get something a little bit like that. So what we could do is make the brush bigger, maybe turn the scattering down and the count down slightly. There we go. So this is kind of going to give us our smoke effect. And we're now going to go back into our original image with our new brush. And first thing we need to do is create a new layer in order to paint on it. And I'm going to do that by hitting Command-Shift-N and then hitting Enter. And we now have a layer on top of everything. So I'm actually going to start by turning off our subject and putting this layer kind of underneath that group. So we're going to be painting this onto our background. And we're going to start by selecting kind of a dirt kind of color, make this a little bit bigger, and then just kind of paint over this. And that's a little bit thick at the moment, so we could either turn down our brush opacity or we could turn down the layer opacity. So I think, because I want to have the flexibility with the layer later, I'm going to just clear this layer. Oh, there we go, clear the layer. And we're going to turn our brush opacity down to about 60%. We're just going to kind of start to paint in some of this dirt. Maybe now we'll pick like a much darker color, and we'll just put a little bit more in. And then we'll pick a lighter color as well, something like that. And we'll make the brush a lot smaller and just kind of paint in a few little bits kind of around. Maybe bring the brush opacity way, way down. And then I think just on this side, to keep with kind of the theme, we'll just add some blues in. Nice sort of pale kind of blues over the top of this. And we turn back on our subject. And I think that already looks a lot better, but I think we can go one further. And we'll actually create another new layer on top. And we'll select kind of that sandy color again, make our brush a lot bigger. And we'll just kind of start to paint in this layer kind of over the top. Maybe turn our brush back up to about 60%. Something like that is starting to look pretty good. And then we just want to go small brush again, nice kind of pale color, and then lower the opacity. And this is just kind of adding like some highlights and some texture into this smoke. Let's go for like a white, just something like that. And you can kind of go as overboard with this as you want. I'm now going to turn the opacity of this top layer down because we just want it to kind of, you know, add to everything. Let's just play with some of these opacities a little bit. It just has to be subtle. It doesn't have to be over the top. But now we've kind of got this natural looking, dusty, smoky look going on. So I think there's one final thing we can do with our new brush preset to try and make this image a little bit better. And that is that I currently don't think he looks very dirty. He doesn't look like he's in a war zone. He's far too clean to actually be in a fight. So I think we're going to have to do something about that. And I'm going to do this in a slightly different way. Rather than actually just painting color kind of into an image, we're going to do this with an adjustment layer and a mask. So I'm going to create a levels adjustment layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this a little bit darker. Okay, let's go quite a lot darker. And don't worry too much about the rest of the image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clip this so it's only going to affect our subject. So I'm going to hit Command-Alt-G, or if you don't want to do it, you can right-click a layer and you've got Create Clipping Mask just there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click our mask, I'm going to invert it, which is Command or Control-I, and then with our brush tool, with our new brush selected, I'm going to hit X to swap my foreground and background color, so I'm painting white. And we're just going to kind of, with a very low opacity brush, just start painting in some kind of areas here. Let's turn this up a little bit. There we go. And I'm not going to worry too much about getting this 100% right just now, because we're going to come back in here in a minute and just kind of tidy this up. But hopefully you can see that this is starting to just make him look a little bit grubby. And we could probably just certain bits of his uniform, just kind of grubby that up as well. Now what we don't want to do is get this in his eyes, so we're now just going to go back to a normal brush. I'm going to just right click, make sure we've got a nice soft brush, fairly small, and we're going to paint with black, just to make sure that this mark doesn't show up kind of over his eyes or sort of his hairline is a little bit funny. We don't want it too much on the gun, not that that's going to make a huge difference. There we go. And then, where was it? Down here, we just want to make sure that it's kind of, you know, it's not too much. So you can just kind of do a little bit of damage control with the mask here. And I think this is looking pretty good. So there's before grime, after grime. So I think this brush has worked out really well for this image. As you can see, this is kind of where we started and this is where we ended up. So thank you very much for watching. My name is Toby and we'll see you next time.